3 black SUVs pulled up to a quiet bookshop in a small town in Vermont. Men in suits stepped out first. The street went silent. Then, he stepped out. She hadn't seen him in 20 years, not since they were 10 years old, not since he promised her, standing on a broken bridge in the rain, that he'd come back when he was strong enough to protect her. She waited 5 years. Then, she stopped. He waited 20, and never did. But now he was back. And he wasn't the boy she remembered. And he was one of the most dangerous men in New York. And he had come back, only for her. The October light was turning copper over Briar Hollow when Ellery Voss stepped onto the porch of the Foxglove bookshop and began pulling the sandwich board inside. The town square behind her was almost empty, just the florist locking his van and 2 teenagers slouched against the war memorial, their phones casting blue on their faces. A Tuesday evening in a place where nothing happened, where nothing had happened for as long as she could remember. And she had bought the bookshop 3 years ago, with money she'd saved over a decade of waitressing, tutoring, and 1 miserable year as a paralegal in Burlington. The building was 140 years old, with warped floorboards that groaned in winter, and a back staircase that led to the apartment where she slept. The previous owner, a retired English teacher named Marguerite, had called it a labor of love. Ellery preferred to call it a labor. But it was hers. Every crooked shelf, every water stain on the ceiling. Every morning she opened the door and smelled old paper and wood smoke. She felt something close to peace. She was crouched beside the door, wrestling with the bolt that always stuck when she heard the engines. Not engine, engines, plural, deep, diesel-throated, moving in formation. 3 black Suburbans turned onto Maple Street from the state road, their headlights cutting through the amber dusk like searchlights. They moved slowly, precisely, in as if they had rehearsed this exact approach. The teenagers looked up from their phones. The florist paused with his keys dangling. Even old Harold Fenn, who had been asleep on the bench outside the hardware store since 4 o'clock, lifted his head and squinted. The Suburbans stopped in a line along the curb directly in front of the Foxglove. Ellery stood up, the bolt forgotten. The first doors opened and men emerged, 4 of them. And they wore dark suits that were too well tailored for Briar Hollow, too deliberate. They positioned themselves at precise intervals, 2 near the lead vehicle, 1 at the middle, 1 at the rear, and scanned the street with the flat-eyed efficiency of people who were paid to notice everything and react to anything. One of them spoke into his lapel. The back door of the center Suburban opened, and Stellan Devereaux stepped out. 20 years had remade him entirely, and not at all. And he was taller, of course. She'd last seen him at 10, a bony, sunburned boy with a chipped front tooth and a bruise on his jaw that never quite faded because his father kept putting it there. Now he was over 6 feet, with shoulders that filled his charcoal overcoat like they'd been built for the garment. His dark hair was cut close, the kind of cut that suggested a barber who charged more than her monthly utilities. His face was harder, leaner. They knew all the softness of childhood carved away by whatever had happened in the 2 decades since he'd climbed into his uncle's station wagon and disappeared down this same road. But the eyes were the same. Dark brown, nearly black, steady as a held breath. She knew him before he turned his head toward her. She knew him the way you know a melody you haven't heard since childhood. Not in the notes, but in the feeling the notes give you. A fist of recognition punched through her chest and lodged somewhere beneath her collarbone. He looked at her. The street went silent. No, that wasn't right. The street had been silent, but now the silence had texture, weight. It pressed against Ellery's eardrums like a change in altitude. Stellan walked toward the porch. His men shifted, but didn't follow. He climbed the 3 steps. She remembered how he used to take them 2 at a time as a boy, racing to see if Marguerite had any free cookies, and stopped in front of her, close enough that she could smell cedar and something darker, something metallic and expensive. "You once told me to come back when I was strong enough to protect you," he said. His voice was low, controlled, nothing like the cracking pitch of the boy she remembered. "I'm back." Ellery didn't move. The wind caught a strand of her hair and pulled it across her face, and she let it stay. No, she was afraid that if she lifted her hand, he would see it shaking. "Stellan," she said, just the name. 2 syllables that she hadn't spoken aloud in years, that had lived in a locked room inside her chest like a piece of evidence she couldn't bring herself to destroy. He studied her. Not the way men in bars studied her, appreciatively, with an agenda. He studied her the way you study a photograph of someone you loved, who might be gone. Carefully, as if memorizing the differences so he could grieve them later. "You changed your hair," he said. She almost laughed, almost. "You changed your life." Something shifted behind his eyes, a flicker, not pain exactly, more like the memory of pain, a scar being touched. "We should talk," he said. "No." The word came out harder than she intended. "No, you don't get to do this. Now you don't get to park 3 armored trucks on my street and walk up like 20 years is something you just forgot to get around to." He didn't flinch. She'd expected him to flinch, or at least to offer some defense, but he simply watched her with those dark, unreadable eyes, and she realized with a cold certainty that Stellan Devereaux had become a man who didn't flinch. Whatever had happened to the boy from Briar Hollow, whatever machinery had forged him into this, it had burned away the flinch reflex along with everything else. 30 minutes, he said. "That's all I'm asking." "You're asking for 30 minutes after 20 years of nothing? Not a phone call, not a letter, not even a Ellery." The way he said her name stopped her. It wasn't a command. It was a confession. 3 syllables loaded with so much compressed history that the air between them seemed to bend under the weight. She looked past him at the men in suits, at the Suburbans with their tinted windows, at the entire spectacle of power and danger that he had parked on her street, in a town where the most exciting thing in recent memory was a raccoon breaking into the Lutheran church. "Inside," she said, "and tell your men that Mrs. Kovac across the street has already called the sheriff." The corner of his mouth lifted, not a smile, the ghost of one. "My men know." She turned and walked into the bookshop, and after a moment he followed. The smell hit him like a fist, old paper, wood smoke, the faintest trace of something floral, lavender maybe, or the dried flowers Marguerite used to keep in mason jars on every surface. The floorboards groaned under his weight in the exact places they'd groaned when he was 10 years old, and the sound traveled through the soles of his shoes and up his spine and into the locked chamber where he kept everything he couldn't afford to feel. He had been in penthouses, in private clubs where the annual membership cost more than this building was worth. In rooms where a single word from him could shift markets or end men. But nothing had unmade him, like walking into this bookshop and seeing the same water stain on the ceiling above the poetry section. Ellery stood behind the counter, arms crossed, her body a barricade. She was 30 years old, and she looked it in the best possible way. The girlishness replaced by something sharper, more defined. Her dark auburn hair was shorter than he remembered, cut to her jaw, and her eyes, green, almost gray in low light, held a wariness that hadn't been there when they were children. Life had been at her. He could see it in the small lines at the corners of her mouth, in the way she held herself, slightly angled, as if bracing for impact. He hated that. He hated it with a violence that surprised him. "Talk," she said. "There are things happening that are going to reach this town," he said. "Business things. Often things that have nothing to do with you, but will touch you anyway. And because of proximity. Because of who I am, and what this place was to me. I came to warn you." "Warn me about what?" "There are people who want to hurt me. They've been looking for leverage. Anything I care about, anyone who matters. Briar Hollow has been scrubbed from every record I control, but records can be found. And when they are, this town becomes a target. You become a target." Ellery stared at him. "Oh, you're telling me that your life, whatever your life is now, has put me in danger?" "Yes." "And you came here to, what, protect me?" "Yes. With those men outside." With whatever it takes. She uncrossed her arms, crossed them again. He could see her processing, the intelligence behind her eyes sorting through the implications like a librarian filing cards. What are you, Stellan? What did you become? He had prepared for this question, and he had rehearsed a dozen answers, sanitized versions, euphemisms, the kind of careful language his lawyers used. But standing in this bookshop, under the water stain, with the groaning floorboards and the ghost of Marguerite's lavender, he found that he couldn't lie to her. He'd lied to senators. He'd lied to federal agents. He'd lied to men who would have killed him for the truth. But he couldn't lie to Ellery Voss. I run an organization based in New York, he said. Import, export, real estate, finance, legal on the surface. Underneath, he paused. Underneath is complicated. Mafia, she said, not a question. That word carries a lot of Hollywood in it, but yes, in the way that matters, yes. The clock on the wall above the mystery section ticked. Outside, one of his men coughed. You should go, Ellery said quietly. I can't do that. You can. You got in those trucks and drove here. You can get back in and drive away. I didn't mean I'm physically unable. I meant I won't. Not until I know you're safe. I was safe until you showed up. The words landed. He absorbed them without expression, the way he'd learned to absorb blows, a stillness that gave nothing away. That's true, he said, and I'm sorry for that. But the threat exists whether I'm standing in this room or not. The only difference my being here makes is that now you know about it, and now I can do something about it. She turned away from him, walked to the window. I looked out at the darkening street, at the Suburbans still idling, at the life she'd built, small, careful, hers, suddenly shadowed by something vast and dangerous. 20 years, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. 20 years and the first thing you bring me is a threat. He didn't have an answer for that, or rather he had too many answers, and none of them were adequate. She had waited 5 years. Then she stopped. He had waited 20, and never did. And she didn't sleep that night. She lay in the narrow bed above the bookshop and listened to the town settle into its nocturnal rhythms. The distant bark of Ned Whitaker's hound, the occasional car on Route 7, the creak and sigh of the old building as the temperature dropped. Somewhere below, in the alley between the Foxglove and the hardware store, one of Stellan's men stood watch. She'd seen the orange pinpoint of a cigarette from her window. At 2 a.m, and she gave up on sleep and went downstairs. She sat in the reading nook, the one with the ancient velvet armchair that smelled like dust and comfort, and she let herself remember. Briar Hollow, Vermont. 20 years earlier. Stellan Devereaux arrived in town on a Thursday in June, sitting in the back of his uncle's wood-paneled station wagon with a black eye and a garbage bag full of clothes. He was 10. His mother had died the previous winter, ovarian cancer. A fast and merciless, and his father, a long-haul trucker with a drinking problem that predated the grief and had since metastasized into something monstrous, had been deemed unfit by the state. Uncle Rowan, his mother's brother, lived in Briar Hollow and worked at the granite quarry. He was quiet and kind and had a garden where he grew tomatoes that won the county fair every year. Ellery met Stellan on his second day in town at the library, and she was reading on the floor between the shelves. Her mother worked doubles at the hospital in Montpelier, and her father had left when she was 4, so the library was where she went after school, every day, a reliable country. Stellan came in looking for a book about engines. He found Ellery instead. "What are you reading?" he asked. She held up the cover. "Island of the Blue Dolphins." "Is it good?" "She's alone on an island and she tames a wild dog. It's the best book in the world." He sat down next to her, cross-legged, and for the next hour they didn't speak. He didn't need to. That was the thing about Stellan even then. He understood silence the way most people understood conversation. It was a shared space, not an empty one. They became inseparable, that whole summer and the school year that followed, and the summer after that. They explored every abandoned barn and creek bed within biking distance. And they built a fort in the old Creighton orchard from plywood and stolen road signs. They told each other things they told no one else. She about the loneliness that lived in her mother's house like a fourth family member. He about the nightmares that replayed the sound of his father's belt on skin, the way the buckle sometimes caught. The last summer, the one before everything changed, they found a stone bridge over Kettle Creek, half collapsed, overgrown with ivy. None they claimed it as their place. They carved their initials into the capstone with a pocket knife. E.V. plus S.D., 2 sets of initials that would outlast them both. "Promise me something," Stellan said one evening. They were sitting on the bridge with their bare feet dangling over the water. The light was going gold. He had a fresh bruise on his shoulder. Uncle Rowan hadn't done it. His father had shown up unannounced the night before, drunk, and before Rowan chased him off with a shotgun and a sermon. Okay, Ellery said. "Promise you'll never forget me." "That's stupid. I'm not going to forget you. You're my best friend." "Promise anyway." She looked at him, really looked, and saw something in his face that she wouldn't understand until years later. Fear. Not of his father, not of the dark, but of disappearing. Of becoming unmemorable. Of being so unloved that he ceased to exist in anyone's mind. "I promise," she said. I promise I won't forget you, not ever. Not even when we're old and gross." He almost smiled. "And I promise I'll come back." "Come back from what?" "I don't know yet, but I'll come back, when I'm strong enough to protect you." "Protect me from what?" He shrugged, but the shrug was a lie. He meant everything. He meant the whole dark world that had already shown him its teeth. 3 weeks later, the state intervened again. In Uncle Rowan's quarry had an accident, a rock slide that cost him his right arm and most of his livelihood. He couldn't keep Stellan. The boy was relocated to a group home in New York State, then another in New Jersey, then another. Ellery wrote letters to the first address. They came back, marked. Returned to sender. She called the county office. She was 11 years old, and they told her they couldn't disclose the placement of a minor. She stopped writing after 15 letters. She stopped looking after 5 years. In the reading nook, in the dark, Ellery closed her eyes and pressed her palms flat against her thighs. The boy on the bridge was gone. She had accepted that years ago. She had built an entire life on the foundation of that acceptance. A life that was small and careful and hers, with no room for ghosts. She had dated. She had loved. Or tried to. There was a man named Philip, who taught history at the high school, gentle and reliable, who had wanted to marry her. She had said no, and when he asked why, she couldn't explain the reason. Because the reason was a stone bridge and a pair of initials, and a promise made by a boy who had vanished into the American foster care system, like a coin thrown into black water. She had told herself she was being ridiculous, that she was romanticizing a childhood friendship into something it hadn't been. That the boy she remembered was a construction of memory, edited and gilded by nostalgia. And then 3 Suburbans had parked on her street, and a man with those same dark eyes had looked at her like she was the only real thing in a world full of counterfeits, and all her careful construction had come apart like wet cardboard. In the morning, Stellan was sitting on the porch of the Foxglove when she came down at 6:30. He had a paper cup of coffee from somewhere. She didn't recognize the brand, and he was reading a hardcover copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. He'd bought it from the shop's outdoor bargain shelf and left a $20 bill on the ledge. The book cost $3. "You stayed," she said. "I told you, I'm not leaving until I know you're safe." "You can't just stay here, Stellan. This is a town. People talk. Mrs. Kovac probably has a photograph of every one of your men by now. Mrs. Kovac and I had a conversation at 11 last night. She brought cookies. Lemon bars. They were excellent." Ellery stared at him. "You charmed Mrs. Kovac." I answered her questions honestly. She appreciated the transparency. "What did you tell her?" "That I grew up here. That I came back for personal reasons. That my men are private security and would not be a disruption. And she believed that. She said she remembered me. She said I was the boy who used to steal apples from Dr. Creighton's orchard. He paused. She wasn't wrong. Ellery sat down on the porch steps. The morning was cool, the kind of New England autumn morning that smelled like wood smoke and dying leaves. Across the square, Lila Bracken was opening the diner. Everything was normal. Everything was exactly the same as yesterday, except for the men in dark suits, positioned at discrete intervals along the street, and the man on her porch, who had once been a bruised boy and was now something else entirely. "Tell me what happened to you," she said. "All of it, from the beginning." He closed the book. Yoy, it set it on the railing. The morning light caught the angles of his face, and she saw, for just a moment, the boy underneath the man. The bones hadn't changed. The architecture was the same. "After Rowan lost his arm, the state moved me to a group home in Albany," he began. "It was, institutional, not cruel exactly, but indifferent. I was there for 8 months, then a foster family in Hoboken, the Thurman Becketts. They were decent but overwhelmed. 4 foster kids, 2 biological. I didn't stay." "Why not?" "Because I was angry, Ellery. I was angry in a way that made me dangerous to be around. I broke a window. I got into fights at school. I was moved again to a group home in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and that's where I met Kirse Pallavicini." She noticed his voice changed when he said the name, a subtle tightening like a guitar string being tuned. "Kirse was 16. I was 12. He ran the home, not officially, but in every way that mattered. And he decided who ate first, who got the good beds, who was protected and who wasn't. He was smart, ruthless, and he saw something in me. I don't know what. Maybe he recognized the anger. Maybe he just needed a kid who was willing to do things without asking questions." "What kind of things?" "Deliveries at first. Envelopes, small packages. I didn't know what was in them, and I didn't ask. Then collections. Then I learned that Kirse wasn't just some teenage bully. He was connected. His uncle, Pasquale Pallavicini, ran a significant operation in Newark. Import and logistics, which is a polite way of saying narcotics, weapons, and money laundering. He told the story the way he told everything, calmly, precisely, without self-pity. And that, she realized, was what made it devastating. He wasn't asking for sympathy, he was reporting facts. By 14, Stellan was embedded in the Pallavicini network. By 17, he had a reputation, not for violence, although he was capable of it, but for strategy. He could see 3 moves ahead. He could read a room the way she could read a page, instantly, intuitively, catching the subtext beneath the text. Pasquale noticed. Kirse noticed. The old man began grooming Stellan for something larger. Pasquale had no sons, Stellan said. Kirse was capable but unstable. He wanted someone who could think, not just act. So he invested in me. Sent me to school. Not a real school, but tutors. Business, finance, law. And he said a good leader needed to understand the system he was breaking. And you just went along with it? I had nowhere else to go, and I was good at it, Ellery. That's the part I can't make noble. I wasn't a victim trapped in circumstances. I saw what was offered and I took it. I chose it. The admission hung between them like smoke. By 22, I was running Pasquale's operations in 3 boroughs. By 25, he was dying. Prostate cancer. And slow and ugly. And he named me his successor, not Kirse. Kirse never forgave me for that. Where is Kirse now? The pause before his answer was just a fraction too long. Kirse is the reason I'm here, Stellan said. He's the threat. 3 days passed with the quiet intensity of a held breath. Stellan's men. She learned there were 6 in rotation, moved through Briar Hollow with a professionalism that almost made them invisible. Almost. The town knew. Of course the town knew. Briar Hollow had 700 residents and a gossip network that would put the NSA to shame. By the second day, The prevailing theory at Lila Bracken's diner was that Ellery's childhood friend had become a tech billionaire with a security detail. And wasn't it romantic that he'd come back for her? Ellery let the rumor stand. The truth was worse. Stellan spent his days on the phone, on his laptop, in the back room of the foxglove that Ellery had once used as a storage space and had now, somehow, become a command center. She watched him work and saw a different person from the one who sat on her porch in the mornings reading philosophy. This Stellan was clinical. His voice dropped. His sentences shortened. He gave orders in a tone that expected immediate compliance, and received it. On the third evening, she overheard a call. She hadn't meant to. She was shelving returns in the history section, and his voice carried from the back room, the door ajar. And he eliminated the Bayonne route. The warehouse on Flushing is compromised. Tell Hazen to move everything to the secondary location and burn the invoices. A pause. No, not yet. When I say. Another pause. Longer. If Kiersa's people show up before Thursday, you handle it. Clean. No witnesses. Ellery set down the book in her hands, a biography of Eleanor Roosevelt, and pressed her fingers against the edge of the shelf until the wood bit into her skin. No witnesses. And she was still standing there when he came out. He saw her face and knew immediately. She was beginning to understand, a man who read people the way seismographs read earthquakes, registering the tremors before the surface cracked. You heard that, he said. No witnesses, she repeated. What does that mean, Stellan, in plain English? What does handle it clean mean? He didn't answer right away. He closed the back room door, walked to the front of the store. He checked the street through the window, a habit she'd noticed, as reflexive as breathing. It means what you think it means, he said finally. Say it. Ellery, say it. He turned from the window. In the amber light of the bookshop, his face looked carved from something ancient and hard. If the people who are trying to kill me find this location before I've secured it, my men will neutralize the threat, up by whatever means necessary. Kill them. Yes. She pressed her hand against her mouth, not because she was naive. She had known on some level from the moment those Suburbans appeared. She had known what he was, but knowing in the abstract and hearing it spoken aloud in the store where she hosted children's reading hour on Saturday mornings, those were different countries, and she had just crossed the border. You need to go, she said. I can't. You need to go, Stellan. Alpha, you need to take your men and your phones and your orders, and you need to get out of my store and my town and my life. I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask you to come back. I know. Then why are you making this my problem? He crossed the room, not toward her. He was too careful for that. He moved to the poetry section, to the spot where the water stain on the ceiling was shaped like a moth, and he looked up at it, and she saw something in his profile that gutted her. Exhaustion. Not physical. Something deeper. The weariness of a man who had been carrying something for 20 years and had forgotten what it felt like to set it down. Because you're the only thing in my life that was ever clean, he said, and I will burn everything I've built before I let someone touch you. She wanted to be angry. She was angry, but underneath the anger was something else, something warm and terrified, and so achingly familiar that it made her eyes sting. That's not fair, she whispered. No, he agreed. It isn't. That night, the threat stopped being abstract. Ellery was closing the shop at 8, later than usual, because she'd been too distracted to keep track of time, when the front window exploded. Not from a bullet, from a brick. It came through the glass in a shower of shards and landed on the hardwood floor with a thud that shook the whole room. Tied to it, with black twine, was a piece of paper with a single line typed in block letters. Ask your boyfriend what he did in Bayonne. Stellan's men were through the door in 4 seconds. She counted. Reggie, the one who smoked, put himself between her and the broken window and drew a weapon that she had never seen him carry before, but that clearly lived under his jacket at all times. Moss, the taller one with the shaved head, was already on the street, moving toward the corner where the brick must have been thrown from. Two others secured the back exit. Stellan arrived 9 minutes later. He had been at the inn on the edge of town, the only lodging Briar Hollow offered, and he came through the door with a look on his face that made Ellery's blood cool. She had seen him controlled. She had seen him calm, measured, deliberate. But this was different. And this was the kind of stillness that preceded violence. The absolute zero of a man who had crossed a line in his mind and was now operating on a different set of rules. He read the note. His jaw moved, almost imperceptibly, the muscles clenching beneath the skin. "Bayana," Ellery said from behind the counter, where Reggie had told her to stay. She was holding a piece of glass in her hand, without realizing it. A thin line of blood, Haim, ran from her palm to her wrist. "What happened in Bayonne?" Stellan looked at Reggie. "Perimeter sweep, half-mile radius. Check the security cameras at the diner and the gas station." "Already pulled them," Reggie said. "Running plates now." Stellan turned to Ellery. He saw the blood, and something shifted in him. A tectonic movement, deep and fundamental. He crossed the room, took her hand, and examined the cut with a precision that was almost medical. "It's not deep," she said. "You're bleeding." "It's a scratch." He didn't let go of her hand. He held it carefully, the way you hold something irreplaceable, and wrapped a clean handkerchief around the cut. Linen, monogrammed with his initials, probably worth more than anything in her first aid kit. "Bayonne," she said again. He kept his eyes on her hand. 3 months ago, Kearse attempted a coup. He tried to turn my distribution network in New Jersey. When that failed, he went after my infrastructure. A warehouse in Bayonne held records, financial records that linked my operations to several legitimate businesses. If those records surfaced, I would have lost everything, not just the organization, my freedom. What did you do? I secured the records. There was a confrontation. Kearse's people didn't leave. She pulled her hand away. You killed them. My men did, under my order. 3 of Kearse's soldiers, it was them or me, Ellery. That's not a justification, it's a fact. She backed away from him. Not far. The store wasn't big enough for far, but enough to feel the distance as a physical thing, an assertion. How many? She asked. Not just Bayonne, total. How many people have died because of you? The question hung in the air like a blade. I don't keep account, he said quietly. And I don't say that to be callous. I say it because I learned a long time ago that the human mind can't hold that math and still function. So you just don't think about it? I think about it every single day. I just can't afford to let it stop me. She stared at him. This man, this stranger, this boy she once knew, and felt the entire architecture of the situation crashing down around her. He was a killer, or at least a man who ordered killing, which was the same thing in every moral framework she had ever encountered. And he was standing in her bookshop, wrapping her hand in a monogrammed handkerchief, looking at her like she was the last good thing in the world. You should have stayed gone, she said. Probably, but Kearse would have found this place eventually, and he would have used you to get to me. The only reason he hasn't already is that I scrubbed every connection between my past and this town years ago. But 3 months ago, someone talked, one of my people, a man named Thurlow, who I trusted, sold information to Kearse, including the name Briar Hollow. The brick, that was a message. Not for you, for me. Kearse wants me to know he's close. He wants me to panic, make mistakes. And will you? The look he gave her was the most honest thing she'd seen from him yet. I don't panic, he said. I plan. Over the next 4 days, Briar Hollow transformed, subtly, almost imperceptibly, but Ellery felt it the way you feel, a change in barometric pressure before a storm. More of Stellan's people arrived, not conspicuously, no more Suburbans, no more suits. They came as individuals, in rental cars and on motorcycles, and they blended in with the deliberate skill of people trained in invisibility. A woman named Felicia, who looked like she could have been a yoga instructor, took a room at the inn, and spent her days on a laptop with 3 monitors. A man named Greer, built like a defensive lineman, but with the soft voice of a librarian, set up a communications hub in a vacant storefront on the square, pretending to be scouting locations for a cafe franchise. Stellan coordinated everything. He was on the phone from 5 in the morning until midnight, speaking in a mix of English, French, and a language she didn't recognize that turned out to be Romanian. Pasquale's mother had been from Bucharest. Nina and the old man had insisted his inner circle learn the language. It was, Stellan explained, useful for conversations you didn't want overheard. Ellery watched all of this from her side of an invisible line. She opened the bookshop every morning. She recommended novels to the handful of regulars who still came in, despite the town's collective curiosity about her visitor. She ate dinner alone in her apartment. She did not invite Stellan upstairs, and he did not ask, but they talked. And every evening, after the shop closed, they sat on the porch, she in the rocking chair, he on the top step, and they talked. Not about Kierse or Bayonne or the organization. They talked about books, about Briar Hollow, about the 20 years between the bridge and the Suburbans. He asked about her mother. She told him, cancer 4 years ago, quick, like his mother, a cruelty shared. She asked about Uncle Rowan. Dead too. Heart attack 6 years after the quarry accident. Stellan had paid for the funeral anonymously. He had stood across the street from the cemetery in Briar Hollow during the service, hidden by trees, and watched them lower the only man who had ever shown him kindness into the ground. You were here, Ellery said, 6 years ago, and you didn't. I wasn't ready. I wasn't safe. If I'd come to you then, I would have brought the same danger I'm bringing now, but without the resources to fight it. Rowan would have understood that. You can't know what Rowan would have understood. He taught me to grow tomatoes, Ellery, and he taught me that you don't bring the harvest in before it's ripe, even if you're starving. She looked at him in the fading light. Is that what this is? The harvest? This is me saying that I've spent 20 years building something, power, money, influence, and I did it for one reason. Every decision, every compromise, every terrible thing I allowed or ordered or committed. One reason. Don't, she said. You. Stellan, don't. You asked me to come back when I was strong enough to protect you. I wasn't strong enough then. I might not be strong enough now, but I'm here, and I'm trying. And if you tell me to leave, I will. But I'll leave men behind, and I'll leave money, and I'll leave a way for you to reach me, because I made a promise on that bridge, and I have never broken a promise in my life. Not one. She stood up. The rocking chair creaked behind her. She walked to the door and put her hand on the frame. The boy who made that promise doesn't exist anymore, she said, and the girl he made it to doesn't either. She went inside. She closed the door. She leaned against it in the dark and pressed her fist against her chest, and she did not cry. She would not cry. She had given herself that rule years ago, and rules were the scaffolding that kept her standing. On the other side of the door, Stellan sat on the top step and looked up at the stars over Briar Hollow. The same stars he'd looked at from the bridge with a girl who smelled like library books. And he felt, for the first time in 20 years, the full weight of everything he had become. The call came on a Sunday. Ellery was in the middle of her weekly ritual, the only indulgence she allowed herself, making French press coffee and reading the Sunday New York Times on the floor of the bookshop with the morning light coming through the one unbroken window. She had replaced the shattered one with plywood and a tarp, giving the foxglove the look of a building in early-stage recovery. Stellan's phone rang at 7:14 a.m. She heard it through the floor. His command center was directly below her apartment. She heard the muffled urgency of his voice, the rapid-fire exchanges, the sound of a chair being pushed back. 15 minutes later, he knocked on her door. Not the shop door. The apartment door, at the top of the back staircase. He had never come to her apartment before. The boundary had been unspoken but absolute. She opened the door in her robe, and the look on his face stopped the complaint forming on her lips. Kierse is in Vermont, he said. Yeah, he crossed into the state last night with 8 men. They're moving toward Briar Hollow. The French press sat on the counter behind her, forgotten, the plunger still up. How long? Hours, maybe less. He's not coming for a negotiation. He's coming to make a statement. What kind of statement? Stellan's jaw tightened. The kind that involves casualties. Ellery gripped the doorframe. The word, casualties, landed in her chest like a stone dropped into still water. Yeah, and the ripples spread outward through her whole body. The town, she said. The people here. Harold, Lila, the Bracken kids. I'm evacuating my men from the town center. When this happens, it'll happen on my terms, on ground I choose, not here. And what about me? I have a car waiting. Reggie will take you to Burlington. There's a safe house. No. Ellery. I said no. I'm not running. This is my town. These are my people. And you think I'm going to hide in some safe house while you turn Briar Hollow into a war zone? It won't happen here. I just told you that. Where then? He hesitated. It was the first time she'd seen him hesitate about anything tactical, and it frightened her more than the information about Kearse. The quarry, he said. Rowan's quarry. It's been closed for years. Remote, contained, defensible. I've been preparing it since I arrived. She stared at him. Oh, you've been preparing a battleground since you got here? I didn't come to Briar Hollow hoping for peace, Ellery. I came because this is where the confrontation was always going to happen. Kearse has been circling me for 3 years. This ends here. The realization landed with the force of a slap. You use this town as bait. No, I used myself as bait. This town is collateral I'm trying to protect. And what about me? Am I collateral? The question cracked something in his composure, the first real fracture she'd seen. His mouth opened and closed. His hand, which she now noticed was gripping the doorframe as tightly as hers, trembled just once. You were never collateral, he said. You were the reason. She wanted to scream at him. She wanted to slam the door and pack a bag and drive south until Briar Hollow was a memory. And she wanted to grab him by the lapels of his ridiculous overcoat and shake him until the boy fell out from inside the man. What? Instead, she said, I want to know the plan. All of it. He told her in the back room, over maps he'd had printed of the quarry and the surrounding terrain. Felicia was there, and Greer, and a man she hadn't met before, older, 50-ish, with a face like weathered leather and the flat effect of someone who had seen enough violence to regard it as weather. In his name was Hazen. He was, Stellan explained, the head of his security operations. The plan was precise. Stellan's people had scouted the quarry over the past week. They knew the access roads, the sight lines, the choke points. The quarry itself was a massive pit of gray granite carved into the hillside over decades, with a single main entrance and 2 narrow service roads. It was, in tactical terms, a kill box, a fact that worked in both directions. Either Kearse will come through the main road, Hazen said, pointing to the map with a pen that probably cost as much as Ellery's car. He's not subtle. He'll bring vehicles, maybe 8 to 12 men. We'll let him enter, then close the service roads behind him. And then what? Ellery asked. The room went quiet. Hazen looked at Stellan. Stellan looked at Ellery. And then I talked to him, Stellan said. Hazen's expression didn't change. But Ellery caught the micro flicker of disagreement, a tightening around his eyes, a slight shift in posture. Whatever Stellan's plan was, his head of security didn't like it. You want to talk to the man who threw a brick through my window and is driving here with 8 armed men, Ellery said. Kearse and I grew up together. In that group home, we were the closest thing either of us had to family. If there's any chance of ending this without more blood, I owe it to that history to try. And if he doesn't want to talk, then Hazen's plan takes over. Hazen's plan, Ellery understood, did not involve conversation. The rest of that day existed in a strange suspension between normalcy and crisis. Ellery opened the bookshop because she didn't know what else to do. 3 customers came in. She sold a cookbook, a children's picture book, and a used copy of East of Eden. She made small talk. She smiled. She rang the register. And underneath it all, a countdown was ticking. At 5 o'clock, Stellan came to the shop. He was dressed differently. No overcoat, no suit. Dark clothes, practical, the kind of clothing you wore when you expected to move fast. He looked younger like this, and somehow more dangerous. The suit was civilization. This was the animal underneath. "I need to tell you something," he said. She was standing behind the counter, her hands flat on the wood, and the posture she always assumed when she was bracing herself. "If this goes wrong tonight, if something happens to me, there's a trust. An attorney in Boston named Sable Prescott has all the documents. The trust holds enough to keep this bookshop running for 50 years. The building is paid off, the taxes are covered. There's also a personal account in your name." "Stellan, let me finish. The account has $3 million in it. It's clean money, routed through legitimate businesses, declared and taxed. No one can trace it to anything criminal. It's yours regardless of what happens tonight." She felt the counter under her hands. Solid. Real. The whole world had become unreliable except for this counter and this floor and the smell of old books. "I don't want your money," she said. "I know, but I want you to have it. I want to know that whatever happens to me, you'll have options. Choices. The ability to stay here, or leave. To expand the shop, or sell it. On to do whatever you want with your life without the constraints that I had when I was 10 years old, and someone else decided my future for me." She came around the counter. He didn't step back. She stopped close enough to see the pulse in his throat. Fast, betraying the calm of his voice. "You're afraid," she said. "Yes." "Not of Kearse." "No, not of Kearse." "Of what?" He looked at her with those dark eyes, the eyes of the boy on the bridge, and the eyes of the man who had ordered deaths and built empires and crossed state lines to keep a promise. And he said the truest thing he had ever said. Of having come this close and losing you anyway. She kissed him. It wasn't a romantic kiss. It wasn't soft or gentle or any of the words that people use to describe kisses in the stories she sold from the shelves around them. It was desperate. It was 20 years compressed into a single act. Every letter returned unopened. In every night she'd whispered his name into her pillow. Every time he'd almost come back and hadn't. Every terrible choice and lonely triumph and quiet devastation. It was a kiss that said, "I'm furious at you and I've never stopped loving you, and if you die tonight, I will never forgive you all at once." He kissed her back. His hands that had signed death warrants and built a kingdom from nothing, cupped her face with a gentleness that broke something open in both of them. And when they pulled apart, she was shaking. He was shaking. "Come back," she said. The same words, rearranged. The same promise, reversed. "I will," he said, and meant it the way he meant everything. Absolutely, unequivocally, against all odds and evidence. The quarry was a wound in the earth. Stellan stood at its edge as the last light bled from the sky, looking down at the pit that had taken Uncle Rowan's arm, and, eventually, his life. The granite walls were 30 meters deep, unlayered in shades of gray and silver, with pools of rainwater at the bottom that reflected the emerging stars. It was beautiful in the way that damage could be beautiful, raw, exposed, honest about what it was. His men were in position. 12 in total. Hazen, Reggie, Moss, and 9 others who had been with him long enough to trust with their lives and his. They were scattered across the quarry's perimeter, invisible in the darkening landscape. Felicia monitored the road from a van parked half a mile away, her screens glowing green with surveillance feeds. At 8:47 p.m., Felicia's voice came through his earpiece. 3 vehicles, main road, 8 minutes out. Stellan closed his eyes. Took one breath. Let it out. He thought about the bridge, the initials carved in stone, a girl who smelled like library books. He opened his eyes. "Let them come," he said. Kearse Pallavicini had changed. And that was the first thing Stellan noticed when the Leod vehicle stopped at the quarry entrance, and the man who had once been the closest thing to a brother stepped out. He was heavier. Not fat. Thick. Solid. the build of a man who had stopped caring about aesthetics and focused exclusively on intimidation. His red hair was cropped close, receding at the temples, and a scar that Stellan didn't recognize ran from his left ear to his jawline. He wore no suit, no pretension, jeans, boots, a leather jacket that looked like it had survived several lifetimes. He carried himself with the loose-limbed confidence of someone who had accepted that tonight might be his last night and had decided to enjoy it. Behind him, his men fanned out. 7 of them, armed. Their faces were blank in the way that men's faces go blank when they've been paid enough to stop asking questions. Stellan stood alone in the quarry's main clearing, illuminated by the headlights of Kyrsa's vehicles. In an intentional choice, a statement. "Stellan," Kyrsa's voice echoed off the granite walls. "You look expensive. Kyrs, you look alive. I wasn't sure you would be. Because of Bayon, your boys killed 3 of mine, cost of business." Kyrs walked closer, his boots crunching on gravel. "But you knew I'd come for the balance." "I knew you'd come. I chose where." Kyrs looked around the quarry, the walls, the shadows, the strategic terrain, and nodded slowly. The old man's quarry. Sentimental. Practical. Same thing with you. Kyrs stopped 10 feet away. In the headlights, his eyes were pale green, almost colorless. "I didn't come to fight you, Stellan. I came to offer you a deal." Stellan said nothing. Waiting was a weapon he had mastered. "Walk away," Kyrs said. "Hand me the network, the New York operations, the finance arm, the political connections, all of it. Walk away clean, take your money, take your bookshop girl, and disappear. I'll let you go. No one chases you, no one touches her. And why would you let me go? Because killing you is expensive. You've got friends in Washington. You've got insurance, files, recordings, favors owed. Taking you out would cost me more than the network is worth. But if you hand it over willingly, those friends become my friends. Those favors become my favors." It was, Stellan had to admit, a rational offer. Kyrs had always been more intelligent than people gave him credit for. And if I say no?" Kyrs shrugged. The shrug was theatrical, but the threat beneath it was not. "Then we do this the other way. And I promise you, Stellan, if we do it the other way, I will find her. Not tonight, maybe not this year, but I will find her, and I will use her, and when I'm done, I will leave her somewhere that you'll find her eventually. That's not a threat, it's a guarantee." The words dropped into the quarry like stones into deep water, and the silence that followed was the most dangerous silence Stellan Devereaux had ever inhabited. He had killed men for less. He had destroyed entire operations for less. The machinery of violence inside him, assembled over 20 years, maintained with ruthless discipline, roared to life like a furnace, and it took every fragment of control he possessed to keep his voice level. "You shouldn't have said that," Stellan said quietly. "It's the truth." "It is." And that's why you shouldn't have said it. Because now I know that no deal keeps her safe. No arrangement, no handshake, no treaty. You've told me that her safety depends on your restraint. And I know your restraint, Kyrs. I grew up watching it. It doesn't exist." Kyrsa's expression shifted, a flicker of recognition that he had miscalculated. "So here's my counteroffer," Stellan continued. "You leave, tonight. You take your men and you drive back to New Jersey and you never speak her name again. In exchange, I let you keep your operation, what's left of it. And I don't send the Bayon evidence to the FBI field office in Newark, which is where it's been sitting in a sealed envelope since last Tuesday." "You're bluffing." "I've never bluffed in my life. Ask Hazen." At the mention of the name, Kyrs stiffened. He knew Hazen. Everyone in their world knew Hazen. And the man's reputation was simple and absolute. When Hazen was involved, the conversation was over. "Hazen," Kyrs said the name like a curse. He scanned the quarry walls, the shadows, the ledges, the places where a man with a rifle could make the whole negotiation moot. "He's here," Stellan confirmed. "Along with 11 others. You brought 7, Kyrs. You're outmanned, outpositioned, and outplanned. The service roads behind you are sealed. The Felicia's been tracking your vehicles since you crossed the state line. I know everything about tonight except which decision you're going to make in the next 60 seconds. The quarry went silent. Kierce's men shifted, Stellan's men didn't. That difference, the stillness of discipline versus the restlessness of uncertainty, said everything. Kierce breathed in, breathed out, and then, slowly, he began to laugh. It was not a pleasant sound. It was the laugh of a man who had been beaten and was too proud to admit it without first wrapping the admission in contempt. You always were the smart one, Kierce said. Pasquale saw that. I hated him for it, hated you for it. I know. And the girl? The bookshop girl? You're really going to give up all of it? The network, the money, the power, for a woman you haven't seen since you were 10? Yes. The answer was so simple, so immediate, so completely without hesitation. On that Kierce actually flinched. You're insane, he said. Possibly. Kierce looked at him for a long time. The headlights threw their shadows across the granite in distorted shapes. Two men, stretched and warped, their outlines overlapping. The FBI envelope, Kierce said. If I leave, if I take your deal, the envelope stays sealed? As long as the terms are honored. If anything happens to me, or to her, or to this town, the envelope opens. Automatically. I'm dead. It opens. Oh, she's hurt. It opens. A brick comes through a window anywhere in Vermont, it opens. You've thought of everything. I've had 20 years to think. Kierce turned, walked back toward his vehicles. His men followed, their formation collapsing into a retreat that tried to look voluntary. At the door of the lead car, Kierce paused. She doesn't deserve you, he called back. And you don't deserve her. That's the tragedy. I know, Stellan said. The engines started. The vehicles turned. And Kierce Pallavicini drove out of the quarry and into the Vermont night, and Stellan Devereaux stood alone in the headlights until the sound of the engines faded to nothing, and all that remained was the wind and the stars and the granite walls of his uncle's quarry, holding the silence like cupped hands. He found Ellery on the porch of the Foxglove at 11:30. She was sitting in the rocking chair with a blanket around her shoulders and a mug of tea gone cold in her hands. And she hadn't been able to stay inside. The walls had felt too close, the rooms too quiet. So she'd come out here and watched the street and counted headlights and tried not to imagine the worst. When his car pulled up, just one car, no formation, she stood so quickly that the blanket fell. He came up the steps. There was dust on his shoes and a scratch on the back of his hand that he didn't seem aware of. His eyes found hers in the porch light. And she saw something in them that she hadn't seen before. Relief, not triumph, not the satisfaction of a man who had won a confrontation. Just relief, simple, human, overwhelming relief. It's done, he said. Tell me what happened. He told her, all of it. The deal, the threat, the counter-offer, the envelope in Newark, the quarry, Kierce's retreat. He'll honor it, she asked. He's a pragmatist. The envelope is real. The cost of breaking the deal is higher than the cost of keeping it. He'll honor it. And the network? Your organization? Stellan sat down on the top step. He looked out at the darkened town, the shuttered shops, the empty square, the ordinary American town that had been the backdrop to the only innocent years of his life. I'm transferring operations, he said. Hazen will run the legitimate businesses, the real estate, the finance arm. Everything else gets dismantled. It'll take time. A year, maybe 2, when there are people who depend on the structure for their livelihoods, and I won't just cut them loose. But it ends. All of it. You're walking away. I'm walking toward. She sat down beside him, not close enough to touch, not yet. The night was cold, and her breath made small clouds in the porch light. I'm angry at you, she said. I know. I'm angry that you came here and disrupted everything and made me feel things I'd decided I was done feeling. I'm angry that you used my town as a chess piece. I'm angry that you waited 20 years. I know. But I understand why. And that makes me angrier because it means I can't hold on to it. The anger. It keeps dissolving into something else. What else? She looked at him. In the dim light, he was both the man and the boy. The dark eyes, the careful stillness, the quality of paying attention that had made him extraordinary at 10 and lethal at 30. "Oh, something I'm not ready to name yet," she said. "Give me time. I've been giving you time for 20 years. Then you won't mind a little more." He almost smiled. The ghost again, but closer to real this time. Stellan did not leave Briar Hollow. He rented the apartment above the hardware store, the one with the slanted ceilings and the view of the square, and he stayed. His men dispersed. Felicia went back to New York to manage the transition. Hazen flew to Chicago. Moss and Reggie remained, but they traded their suits for flannel and denim, and within a week they were regulars at Lila's diner, and Reggie had started dating the woman who ran the flower shop. The town absorbed the strangeness the way small towns do, with gossip, then acceptance, then amnesia. Within a month, Stellan Devereaux was just the man who'd come back for Ellery Voss. And wasn't that a nice story? And did you hear he's fixing up the old Rowan place? He was. And the farmhouse where Uncle Rowan had grown his prize-winning tomatoes had been vacant for years, slowly losing its battle with weather and gravity. Stellan bought it with clean money and began the renovation himself, not with contractors but with his own hands. Ellery found this remarkable. She'd seen him command a room of dangerous men with a word. Watching him struggle with a table saw was a disorienting contrast that she found, against her better judgment, endearing. They moved slowly. On coffee on the porch in the mornings, walks along Kettle Creek in the evenings. They went to the stone bridge, still standing barely, and found the initials. EV plus SD, faded but legible, carved into limestone by a boy with a pocket knife, and a need to leave proof that something mattered. Stellan touched the letters with his fingertips. "I thought about this bridge every day," he said. "In the group home, in Pasquale's house, in every boardroom and back alley and hotel room, from here to Milan. This bridge. It's just stone," she said. But she was crying. She was crying, and she couldn't stop, and she didn't try. He pulled her against him, not with force, with gravity. The kind of inevitable closeness that happens between two people who have been orbiting each other for 20 years and have finally, exhaustedly, surrendered to the physics. She pressed her face into his chest and felt his heartbeat, steady. Oh, strong, alive. And she said the words she had been carrying like a stone in her throat since the night he drove away in his uncle's station wagon. "I never forgot you, not one day. I tried so hard, and every single day I failed." His arms tightened around her. She felt his breath against her hair, felt the tremor in his chest that he couldn't entirely control. "I know," he said. "I know, because I did the same." The months passed. The renovation of Rowan's house progressed slowly, deliberately, the way Stellan approached everything, as if haste were a form of disrespect. The tomato garden was replanted, the porch was rebuilt. A reading nook was added in the living room, with a window seat that overlooked the orchard. Ellery didn't move in. Not yet. She kept her apartment above the foxglove, kept her routines, kept the careful architecture of her independence intact. But she spent evenings at the farmhouse. She brought books. He cooked, surprisingly well. EA's skill learned from Pasquale's Romanian housekeeper, a woman named Dacia, who had fed him and scolded him and taught him that a man who couldn't feed himself couldn't take care of anyone else. They argued. Of course they argued. She was stubborn, and he was used to being obeyed, and the collision of those two forces produced friction that was sometimes frustrating and sometimes exhilarating and always honest. She pushed back on his protectiveness. I survived 30 years without a security detail, Stellan." He pushed back on her stubbornness. Accepting help isn't the same as admitting weakness. They found their rhythm. It was imperfect and uneven and sometimes exhausting, the way all real things are. But it was theirs. One evening in January, a bitter, beautiful evening with snow falling over Briar Hollow in fat, deliberate flakes, Ellery was shelving new arrivals at the Foxglove when Stellan came in. He was carrying a box. Wooden, old, the kind of box you'd find in an antique shop. "I want to show you something," he said. He set the box on the counter and opened it. Inside, wrapped in cloth, were 15 envelopes. Yellowed, creased, addressed in a child's handwriting to various group homes and foster agencies across New York and New Jersey. Her letters. The ones she'd sent. The ones that came back, returned to sender. "How?" she whispered. "I tracked them down. It took 3 years and a private investigator and a lot of very uncomfortable conversations with government records offices. But they existed. In file cabinets. In storage units. In the basements of agencies that had been shut down and reopened under new names." He paused. "I never received them, but I needed you to know that they existed, that they were real, that you tried." She picked up the first letter. The handwriting was hers, young, uncertain, the letters too large for the lines. "Dear Stellan, I miss you. School started and you're not here. The bridge is still standing, I checked." She made a sound, not a sob, not a gasp, something between the two. A sound that came from the place where grief and joy occupy the same space, indistinguishable. Stellan stood on the other side of the counter, his hands in his pockets, watching her read. And in the warm light of the bookshop, with the snow falling outside and the old floorboards groaning beneath them, he looked, for the first time since he'd returned, like he was home. The story didn't end with a wedding, or a dramatic declaration, or a moment of crystalline resolution. It ended, or rather it continued, the way real love continues, in small moments, in mornings, in the accumulation of ordinary days that, taken together, form something extraordinary. Stellan's transition out of the organization took 14 months. There were complications. And there were phone calls that made him pace the farmhouse at 3 in the morning. There were 2 trips to New York that lasted a week each and left him looking hollowed out and older. But he came back. Each time, he came back. And each time, the weight on his shoulders was a little less, the lines around his mouth a little softer. He never pretended to be clean. He didn't rewrite his history or minimize what he'd done. When Ellery asked, he answered, honestly, completely, without self-pity or false nobility. And she listened, and she judged, because she was human and moral and unwilling to exempt him from accountability. And she decided, over and over, that the man he was becoming was worth the reckoning with the man he had been. On a Tuesday in October, exactly 1 year after the Suburbans had parked on her street, Ellery closed the Foxglove early and walked to the stone bridge over Kettle Creek. Stellan was already there, sitting on the capstone with his legs dangling over the water, the way they'd sat as children. He was reading. She couldn't see the title from the path, but she knew, she always knew, that it was Island of the Blue Dolphins. He read it every fall. He'd never told her this. She'd found a worn copy in his bedside table and understood without asking. She sat down beside him, close this time, her shoulder against his. "I've been thinking," she said. Dangerous. "I've been thinking about what you said, that you waited 20 years. He set the book down. "I was wrong on the porch that night," she said. "When I said the boy who made the promise doesn't exist anymore. He does. He's sitting right here. He's just complicated now. I've always been complicated. I know, I just didn't have the vocabulary for it at 10. She took his hand, and the hand that had signed orders and built walls and carried a wooden box of old letters across 20 years. "I'm not going to say I forgive everything," she said, "because forgiveness isn't a single event. It's a practice. It's something I'll have to do over and over, probably for the rest of my life. But I'm choosing to do it. I'm choosing you, Stellan, not the Mafia boss, not the Empire. You, the boy on the bridge who was afraid of being forgotten." He turned to look at her, and the October light was the same light. Copper, amber, golden, that had been falling on this bridge for 100 years. The creek ran beneath them, unhurried, patient, following its course. I was never afraid of being forgotten, he said quietly. I was afraid of being forgotten by you. She leaned into him. He put his arm around her. They sat on the bridge over Kettle Creek in the small town where everything had begun and everything had almost ended. And the light turned gold, even when the water ran. And the carved initials in the capstone held their shape against the weather, as they always had, as they always would. Some promises take 20 years to keep. But the ones that matter, the ones carved in stone by children who didn't yet know what they were promising, those are the ones that last.